Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome back to the Longevity Lounge. My name is Ben Woodward. I'm your host.
And I'm Caylee Shaw. I'm your co-host.
And today we've got two wonderful guests. Dr. Joshua Berka. Welcome, Joshua.
Thank you.
And Mac Larsen.
Yeah, good to be back.
Yeah, great. So today we're talking about a really big challenge for so many entrepreneurs in terms of health and focus and priority, and that is burnout. How do we move from burnout back to balance? This is something that I think so many of us want, right? So
Yeah.
I know, just kind of jumping into this kind of feet first, I was speaking at a Virgin Startups conference in the UK, in Manchester, a number of years ago, with a lot of entrepreneurs at the front end of their journey, right? And we're in this panel discussion where we're talking about how did we get from where they were to where we were, right? And they wanted to know the roadmap. And one of the challenges that one of the speakers on the panel shared, which was really interesting, was the challenge with getting started for many people is they're doing their 40 hours a week, doing their day job, and then when they come home from work, they're then needing to do their hustle afterwards and do another 40 hours in the week in order to get their side gig up and going. And a lot of people, they said that was the hardest part of the journey, is where you're trying to balance both. And yet we're doing this so that we can have balance, and yet we're getting the complete opposite to begin with. And so the big question there is, for so many people, they get burnout sometimes even before they start. But we've talked about stress. Burnout is different to stress, right?
Yeah.
How would you differentiate burnout compared to conventional stress, Dr. Berka?
From a personal level or from a physiological perspective?
Well, physiological. Let's start there.
It's interesting. I mean, I've said it in previous episodes where our body needs some level of stress. But as it gets more and more without recovery, all we can do in life is compensate. And the compensatory mechanisms in the body, from the adrenal glands perspective, as we produce more and more stress hormones, cortisol, we have something called glucocorticoids, that will last for a while, but then we continue to be under this stress. I mean, this is adrenal fatigue. Then you go to adrenal exhaustion, where those compensatory mechanisms are no longer working. So we get into the hormonal levels, start burning hormones. And then as it gets worse into exhaustion, we literally begin to eat ourselves. Degradation, sarcopenia, where you start eating your own muscle in addition to fat. But yeah, it's a...
Thanks for pointing to my stomach then.
Yeah, right.
Wait a second.
So being stressed can make you skinny.
and you bring this as a joke, but it's for real. One of the first compensatory mechanisms of adrenal exhaustion, as you start getting in this, is deposition of what's called VAT, visceral adipose tissue, which marbles, literally cuts through the liver, all your organs, the viscera, and it gives you this belly. And the compensatory mechanism of why that is because fat burns more effectively than sugar, almost 3 times more. And so sometimes we can get bigger or get a little belly for that perspective. But ultimately, this doesn't just affect our physical body. This affects our mind, our way we think, our outlook, our expectation of what's occurring. Who wants to be being hit from every angle? It's not a natural thing that even happens in nature. Even nature recovers during storms.
So what you've touched on there, I think is really important. One of the key differentiators between stress and burnout is the chronic nature of what you've experienced.
That's right.
And it affects body and mind, and I think spirit, everything just starts to compromise.
Yeah.
Caylee, when you were starting your career, you immediately kind of hit a burnout scenario. Tell us a little bit about what your journey was.
Yeah. So when I started off, I went to college on a dance team scholarship and had the great benefit of doing that, and went off to Missouri and was having a great time with my dance team, living with my 4 roommates. It was a really fun time. 5 girls in one house. Highly recommend.
Got it.
But when we all lived together, we were having a great time, and I unfortunately had a knee injury and had to be done with my dance career and move back home to Utah. And finish up my last year of college and get started with my career right away. I just didn't have the luxury of that scholarship and the money coming in. So I just started my career and hit the ground running in marketing as an account manager. And if anyone's worked in a marketing agency, you know it's really knock down, drag out. And I started off with, we were a really small startup. Started off with one client and quickly onboarded 6 more after that in my first 3 months. So a lot of questions I didn't know the answer to. And I was 21 years old, didn't want to be the dumbest person in the room, but I was, and didn't want to not know the answer to the question. So I really immersed myself in everything marketing, everything about my clients so I could learn and serve them as best as I could with the little knowledge and experience that I had. And that really drove me into the ground, to be quite honest. And so after long nights of doing research, I'd work from 9 to 5. And then, of course, COVID happened and I was working from home. And so my desk just became I became a permanent fixture of my desk. Didn't leave. And I'd be there at 5 o'clock. I'd close my computer and then open it back up and just start researching and just trying to learn everything that I could, all while finishing college.
Gosh.
And it just all became way too much, way too fast. And I didn't want to pump the brakes because I didn't want to fall behind, and I didn't want to get fired, to be honest. So that turned downhill pretty quickly for me, and I just realized that I'm not a service to my clients, not a service to my fiance at the time, my husband now.
Yeah,
he stuck around. Wasn't a service to him, and just wasn't the best version of myself. So I had to quickly get real with what I was doing and what I wasn't accomplishing, and just realize that.
Yeah, I don't want to lean too heavily into the pain point of this, but when you say it went downhill pretty quick, how did that manifest for you?
Yeah, when I get really stressed, I get messy. My house gets messy. I like to cook 3 meals a day. I'm traditional in that sense that I work, but I like to cook us breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Wasn't cooking. We were eating out. House was a disaster. Wasn't doing my laundry. It just got messy fast. And when my mind gets messy, I don't know if anyone feels like this, but my surroundings get messy.
Yeah.
And then I feel like I'm a failure at home. I'm a failure at work. I'm a failure at school. I'm, passing with C's, right? But, C's get degrees, as they say. But I wasn't feeling like I was good at anything. So it's hard in that sense where you get burnt out and then you don't have the energy. To go forward. So I think where I first started was, let's clean up this house. Let's get this laundry done. Let's get these meals going so we can get some good fuel in my body. And then got to turn things luckily around pretty quickly there. But yeah.
It's interesting how you were burning out, you were crashing in one area.
Yeah.
But then you immediately started to go, this is kind of like everywhere in my life. It became a catastrophizing kind of manifestation, right? It was bad in one spot, but everywhere suddenly felt bad versus just that one place.
Yeah. And I didn't touch on this, but I'd injured myself in dance, so I wasn't able to dance. And that was the thing that I loved the most. That was my hobby, right?
Yeah.
So I'd immerse myself in work. Now I'm cut off from dance, cut off from my community there with, my teammates and my roommates. And now I'm in an apartment and working and hustling in school. And I don't even have an outlet for my hobby that I love so much.
Man, anyone else feel stressed just listening to that? I mean, Caylee, you've been
I'm good
through
now.
it.
This is a really motivational podcast, isn't it?
But also, I think you bring up a good point, though. What about the relationships? You talked about the little. How was that when you're going through it? Did they suffer at all? Was it tougher, or did you find support with your relationships? Did they come through and help you out through that? Or tell me, I'd love to know a little bit more about the relationships. Yeah,
well, my husband was a huge help to me at the time. We were engaged, newly engaged at the time, but he had just finished playing college football. So we were both just going through this. What is the meaning of life and who are we as people, right?
You start to question everything, right?
We've been athletes, and him more so than me. I don't know, dance is considered a sport to all you guys out there, but, and athletes in our own right, working at this one thing that we know we're really good at. And then you get thrown into something that you're like, am I good at marketing? Am I good at school? Am I good at, almost being a wife?
Yeah.
So these are all these things that were kind of building on top of each other. But the relationship aspect with my husband was huge because we just were figuring it out together. And is the blind leading the blind, right? We didn't know what was going on. But yeah, I think obviously I turned to, mentors and things in my life where it was like, wow, are your 20s just the worst? And everyone's like,
That question that you ask yourself when you're really struggling, I think is one of the most painful questions we can ask ourselves when we're experiencing burnout, which is that imposter syndrome starts to creep in, right?
Yes.
If I'm sinking and drowning, am I good enough? Is this all me?
Yeah.
And that becomes a very dangerous place to start swimming in, right? So, Mac.
Yeah, I love it because the reason why I asked her about the relationships is here's kind of a unique version of burnout. What happened in my life is when I first started, my career and travel was a big part of it. So my wife and I are just starting out. We, had our first child. And I'm traveling anywhere between 35 to 42 weekends a year because most of the time we're having meetings on weekends, right? Just the way the nature of this business is. And then we have a second child and I'm still averaging 35, weekends a year. Then we have our third child, right? And so now we've got 3 kids. My wife's at home. Yes, she didn't have to work at the time, but I'm not home to do anything. And so, and I was loving it. Not because I was away from my family, but I was learning so much. I could feel myself really blossoming in my career. But what was I ignoring and who was getting burned out?
Yeah.
The love of my life.
Yeah.
Right? And then sometimes when I think back at those moments, and we weren't prepared for that. She wasn't prepared for it. And so we would have really hard conversations. And I didn't understand why she'd want to have such hard conversations. Man, I'm doing this for us. All those things like, why are you even questioning this? And but we had no family around. We were in a city where, we made friends, but there's no mom, there's no dads, there's no brothers or sisters to help babysit or anything. So it's interesting that I was on this trajectory that I thought like, this is great. The Larsens are coming. This is gonna be amazing. Man, life is just everything. But my wife was getting burned out and feeling lonely. And is this really what my life's going to be like?
Yeah.
Are my 20s going to be this bad?
Yeah.
I thought being married and having a family was going to be incredible and exciting, and it's stressful. And I'm doing this as a single mom. She used that term a lot, is what she felt like. So burnout on the opposite side of my life, I wasn't necessarily getting burned out early on in my career, but my wife sure was.
Yeah.
And so those are tough conversations to have when you're actually newly married, even though you got 3 kids and we're into it, 7 years or so, those are really kind of in your face type of conversations that when anyone experiencing burnout, if you hold it in, I think that's when bad things happen. And I think Dr. Berka, you talk about it physiologically, man, when you just try to keep everything held in, but thank goodness, my wife didn't, and thank goodness we had good conversations and we could start thinking that through, and I could start working with my employer a little bit differently to say, hey, what if we didn't, or what if we tried something different, or could we have someone else travel, and things worked out for the better. But it's interesting, a little reverse burnout in the sense that you think you're doing awesome, but you've got someone that loves you a lot that they're getting burned out.
Yeah, I had the same experience. I was thriving in my career. Things were, cooking and doing great. And I remember my wife saying to me once, she said, can we just not talk about work for the next 2 weeks?
2 weeks?
She gave me a time frame, right? She's like, because that seems to be all you talk about, right? Is just work. And at first I was kind of both taken aback and a little offended. And I was like, wait a second, but I'm doing so well. Why would I not want to talk about this?
Right.
Yeah.
And she's like, just that's all you talk about. And I didn't realize that until I accepted her challenge and said, okay, for 2 weeks, I won't talk about work. And then I sat there and went, oh, I don't know what to talk about. and I realized
about the rain?
I just got obsessed, so kind of preoccupied, so much so, but it was affecting her and, of course, our relationship. Right? So, I like that reality that sometimes burnout happens to us and sometimes it happens to those around us. How does it show up? What are some of the early signs, Dr. Berka, when we are experiencing that? What are some of the early signs physiologically?
It's different for everybody because we're all genetically different. But one of the first things that generally people think or feel rather is before you get to burnout stage, when there's initial stress, you feel a little alive. It's like something you want to go for. As that starts to continue to build up though, fatigue sets in. Physically, like, oh gosh, I'm tired. And where do people go? they go for energy drinks, they go for the caffeines, they go for sugary type of foods to compensate.
Yeah.
And it works perceptually for a short time.
Yeah.
But it's not worth what you put in, meaning you don't get, your investment doesn't return.
Yeah.
It continues to degrade. And what ends up happening is somewhere in the body, it begins to break down depending on your weak area. In the past, you said sometimes in your shoulders. A lot of people, one of the first symptoms they start to have are gastrointestinal problems, the ability to digest the world. Think about that for a second. The ability to digest the world, to process the world through molecular mechanisms, through food, how we're processing the food in our body, not just taking it in, but digesting, assimilating, and detoxing, letting go.
Yeah.
It becomes an issue to let go because we think we need to have everything or store everything so it can even overflow into somebody's life in their habits, their patterns. So these are some of the things that develop, but mainly it's fatigue. And then, I mean, how do you get rid of fatigue? You actually go to sleep and rest. These individuals can't even go to sleep sometimes because they're so disturbed that they'll have problems usually staying asleep, and they get that 3 a.m., 1 to 3 a.m. wake up and can't go back to sleep because they're already going again about those things that are causing the stress.
Oh, wow. So it's just almost like this
Vicious cycle.
Yeah, just this vicious cycle that keeps going over and over again.
And I think it seems like the physiological response to that, to the burnout and the stress, is generally what is that the turning point for people, or they realize, okay, it's time to get it on back on track. Because
if you got your head on straight,
yeah.
But you've brought this up before. Individuals sometimes become bullheaded or stuck in like, I'm doing this. I'll be a failure if I don't continue to do this.
Yeah.
And so they have programming from their upbringing, from their expectations of themselves, of the world, other people's expectations of them.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to tell you, oh yeah, it hits the wall and everyone just rests and recovers. That's the rare side of it.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
People generally will come in to see me as a physician, not in the early stage of adrenal exhaustion, which we can test through salivary cortisol. There's tests that can be done. They come to me later when they've already hit the wall and they're already manifested into physical symptoms of even dis-ease.
Yeah. When I was going through my personal experience, I had never had migraines before. Like I was getting them, and I was getting a migraine almost every day. And it was to the point where it was pulling me away from the work that I was trying to immerse myself in. And then I'm thinking, oh, it's what's causing it. Like I'm so stressed, I'm so burnt out that I'm seriously getting a migraine every day. It's like my body was telling me like, you've got to stop. So I wonder if are headaches and migraines typical?
Absolutely. And before I even go into like the treatment or anything, most of allopathic medicine, if you go in with a headache, this is a symptom that a suppressive therapy will be given in many ways. And I'm not speaking about migraines but stress-induced headaches, take an NSAID, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, or caffeine or whatever it is. And what you're doing, you're actually vasodilating. You're having an effect on the vasculature too.
Okay.
And so as stress occurs, in the beginning, the vessels open up, but over time, it's about conservation. And so did you ever get cold hands, cold feet when you were going through this?
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, all the blood starts to move inside of the body almost the same way that we would have if we were in shock.
Oh, wow.
And so it's a low-grade shock that continues and continues. And if we don't recognize these symptoms, it will take us down. It's like we're not designed to keep going. Nothing in nature does that. No animal does it. Everyone rests once they perform. There's a time to do and there's a time not to do. We're just not designed to keep going and going and going. Even if we supplement, I hate to use that word, with caffeines and these type of things that are giving us stimulation, but don't sustain.
Yeah.
Well, that's the scary thought, right? Is in the society that we live in now, the tendency is to reach for quick fixes.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we're all moving down these fast-moving rivers, and life is taking us at a new speed that society has kind of built. And if we are starting to experience that sense of burnout, it's too scary to think, I need to get off the boat to recharge, to replenish, to refresh, because the boat is just burning down this river, right?
Yeah.
And so the tendency is to go for quick fixes, which don't have that long-term positive benefit for our bodies, and certainly not for our minds, right? So caffeine boosts, Red Bulls or
Sugar,
kind of energy drinks, that kind of thing, not healthy long-term strategies.
Sure.
But I've also seen people do that emotionally in their business, right?
yeah.
Because we're talking about what makes this journey of burnout unique is duration, time, right? It's not a short-lived moment. This is a long-term experience. It's chronic. So when people start to experience, fatigue, stress over the long term, and they start to get that burnout, that also impacts not just their choices in terms of diet and exercise and lifestyle, the kind of the obvious quick fix go-tos, but very subtly, subconsciously, they go for quick fixes mentally in terms of strategies to improve their business or their circumstance, right?
Sure.
And Mac, have you seen that? You've worked with thousands of entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah, and I think what it really comes down to is when I look across the board of all the entrepreneurs that, man, they come out of the gates, they go strong. Maybe they experience a little bit of fatigue, but for the most part, they push through those early stages and they find success. But somewhere along the way, let's say it's 2 or 3, 4 years in, they shift their activity from doing to managing. And I think that's the trigger in most of the businesses that I've seen that start to experience burnout is, I don't want to do that anymore. Or it's harder because guess what? The entrepreneur or the customers are different now to attract 3 or 4 years. There's different trends going on. It's not as easy. Or, you know what? I want other people to do that part of the business. I like being the person in the front of the room, right? I like to be in the coach. And once they make that shift, what they don't recognize is other people that are following them. What I have learned in watching other businesses is people do about 50% of what you do. Not everyone's going to work as hard as I do. Some do, very few, but most on my team don't. But they'll give us 50% effort. But what they'll do is 100% of what I don't do.
Yeah.
And if I switch my activities to be more like this or something that seems a little bit more fun or fulfilling, well, guess what the rest of my team does or those that I'm leading? They think that's the way to grow. That's the way they feel like that's how success is. If Mac's doing it or that person's doing it, well, then that's what success. So then all of a sudden you're leading everyone down the same path. So it always comes down to a shift in activities and typically a shift away from you attracting new customers, expecting others to do it for you while you kind of go off and do these other things. And what happens is doesn't happen right away. Burnout doesn't happen right away. It might be a year down the road that those fruits start to show, the business starts to slow down. And then guess what? Ben, you probably experienced this, and Caylee, Dr. Berka for sure. People start blaming anyone but themselves because no, I'm a great leader. Look at all these people. Look at the big business I've built over 4 or 5 years. But because they made that shift away, they're not willing to confront that to say, well, I made a change in my activities. It was that. What I need to go back and maybe reevaluate that choice. Instead, all of a sudden, it's the company. Remember, the company's not doing a very good job, Ben. Or Mac, it's the company's fault. Why didn't you come out with a new product? The packaging's no good. Oh my goodness, why did you do that? Hey, you know what? All of a sudden, I had a product that showed up on my doorstep and it was broken. What's wrong with this company? Maybe it's the first time that a product has ever shown up broken at their house or something, or spilled or whatever, and they give no grace because why? They're finding ways to blame. Why their business isn't attracting new people, why their business is stagnating, why their business isn't growing. And most people don't want to look within. Why? Because it's scary, it's hard, and you got to do some hard yards at that point.
Right.
So I think, Ben, what I've seen most entrepreneurs that eventually get to burnout, the burnout doesn't always look like I need a rest, but I don't want to do the thing that was generating the most money in their life. All of a sudden they're like, well, maybe I should go do something else because this doesn't work. When really it came down to just 1 or 2 little choices. It wasn't a big thing.
Yeah.
The company really didn't change that quickly over a year's time that all of a sudden the packaging's no good, or the company didn't do this, or we should have been doing that, or my team members are no good all of a sudden. It's just that. And so their burnout looks like, well, I'm going to go because I want those feelings as an entrepreneur when you're starting a new business and a company, you're ticking boxes and I'm doing this. So they try to go back and maybe steer away from this business because it doesn't work anymore. I see that so often. They try something else and then eventually they'll come right back to this and be like, you know what? Maybe this wasn't that bad because it's harder than they think on the other side. But I think it's just a shift away from some activities. And if they listen, if they've got a coach or a husband or a spouse that can help them or turn to some mentors, you can catch them early on so they don't get that burnout and they recognize that there can be creativity still within the same business. They just need to attract customers in a different way, right? We've talked about that in early podcasts, right? Where you have to do things differently. How you started your business isn't how you're going to finish it because things just change. So why would you ever believe that you could keep doing the same thing over and over again forever and continue to have the same result? It's just not going to work.
Yeah.
And it's confirmation bias, right? Once you already have something in your head and then one thing checks that box, you're like, there it is.
Yep.
There it is. The packaging, like you said, the packaging's wrong or the product spilled or the shipping took too long. Once you have that thing in your head and it confirms it, you're done for.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, yeah. I want to kind of lean into this point that we've kind of touched on a little bit here of relationships, but mentoring. You just use that word, turning to a mentor.
Yeah.
And I immediately thought of my wife. Right?
Yeah.
I've always referred to my career as our career, right? Because I couldn't be accomplishing what I've done if she wasn't lockstep with me and doing what we're doing together, right?
Yeah.
So, but she's always been a great mentor to me. And one thing that I've found is when I am starting to feel that burnout or that just that pull, in the wrong direction, the worst thing I can do is be a typical bloke and not talk about it. Right? Keep my feelings to myself. Right? That's the easiest.
Is that why we started this podcast, Ben?
This is public
Ben
therapy.
is finally getting his feelings out.
I'm putting them on the table today. But it consistently blows my mind when I am feeling the stress and the strain and my mind starts to get to wrong conclusions, right? Look, the blame game happens, right?
Yeah.
It's not me, it's this, it's that, it's the other. And we start to point the finger because that's the easiest solution. It's amazing to me when I have those conversations with my wife or when she elicits that information from me and pulls it out, how at the end of one conversation, I can be going, oh my gosh, I see the world differently now.
Yeah.
I was about to run off a cliff and I didn't even realize it.
Yeah.
Right? And I think there is an important responsibility that we have when we are leading a team, for example, or if we are out front in any way, and regardless of how big or small that team might be. But if we do have these responsibilities of leadership to stay well connected and to have that communication with our teams so that burnout doesn't lead to wrong conclusions and wrong behavior because it just takes people off in the wrong direction.
Oh man, it does. It does. I don't know, Dr. Berka, I'm sure you've seen it in your practice as well, right? Just that burnout and how it was just little things that they could have done early on and not let it get all the way to here and give up and things. So
yeah, again, the small little things. I mean, we compensate, but we also are adapting. Mm-hmm. We're constantly adapting to our environment. And if we're not allowing that adaptation to occur or it's not happening and we're stagnant and we can't recognize those symptoms, that stress is going to manifest either locally inside or most importantly to those people we care about and love the most. And it will spill out into the family, into work environment.
Yeah.
And so it's not good for anyone to be overwhelmed. And that's where community comes in a lot of time, whether that's family, whether that's friends, other environments. It takes the burden in many ways off that individual. Because a lot of times, I mean, first of all, stress is in the eye of the beholder. And so how we're managing those situations really determines whether we move and dump off the cliff or whether we move in this direction and stop, get some foresight, get some awareness of where we are, or like you're talking about, somebody who cares and loves you enough is actually giving you information saying, hey, check yourself. This is the situation. And then us having the ability to say, okay, we can do that. A lot of times, this is why individuals will come into a doctor.
yeah.
And I'm not talking like just to get a drug or something like that, to get a perspective or get a mere feedback and to get guidance. And from a naturopathic perspective, guidance is in many ways lifestyle choices that we're making, daily lifestyle choices. Granted, there's a lot of stress, but what are the prophylactic or preventative things that we can do to not experience those things as much?
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. That's really well said. So we've talked a lot about the negatives. There's got to be some things that we could do to maybe help prevent it. Am I right? I mean, this has been a great discussion, but man, what could we do, I guess? What have you guys done be it business or, physiological, or there's got to be some things that you've done in your own lives or you've seen others in your life. What are some ideas, you guys, to help people so they don't get all the way to burnout? What do you think, Caylee?
Yeah. Well, Ben talks about, having your wife pull you back on the tracks is great. And I think I have the same in my husband. And we kind of started once this burnout thing manifested itself, right out of college for me, and for him as well. But we started this little saying of getting each other back on the tracks. And we say to each other, life's not that serious. And it sounds ridiculous in essence, right? Because you're like, well, yes, I mean, some parts aren't, but some parts in life are, keeping your job and, keeping the people around you, like knowing that they're loved and all of that obviously is that serious. But having that is just kind of our moment to get back on that. Okay, I'm overreacting about XYZ, or I'm getting burnt out about something that is my fault. I can control it. I'm the one that let it go so far, right? Or maybe it was out of my control and now I have to realize that there's things that I can't control. But that little saying, or, like you said, your wife, stopping you and being like, hey, can we not talk about work for a couple of weeks? Or just little things like that. I think you're just knowing, the people that you're around and just really, really pulling them back on. So
I like just the simplicity of that and just a phrase, right?
We say it all the time. Yeah. And it's so hilarious because I mean, it is a joke at this point because we say it during very serious times of our life. Like we said it as we were closing on our first house and signing our mortgage papers. And they said, well, let's have, because you have to, give forms of identification.
Yeah.
So we gave our driver's licenses. And then she said, do you have another form of photo ID? And I said, I don't. I have my Costco card. And she said, that's fine. And so my husband and I both handed over our Costco cards and we looked at each other and we said, life's really not that serious. You can buy your first home with a Costco card.
There you go. Well, one thing for me is I think the reason we get into a state of burnout in the first place is we have abdicated responsibility, right? Because there is we're there because we think life is happening to us.
Yeah.
Right. And we are the recipients. We're responding and we're struggling, but it's not our fault. That's why we're burning out, right? Because I've got these demands pulling me this way and that way and so on. So I think for me, step one is no longer abdicating responsibility. Because as soon as I say it's not my fault, the challenge with that is what follows is if it's not my fault, if it's yours or the circumstance or what have you, then if it's not my fault, then I can't do anything to fix it because it's not on me. It's on you or the circumstance. And so therefore now I'm just being buffeted and there's nothing really I can do but just try to swim and keep my head above water.
Yeah.
But as soon as I go, there is something I can do about this, I can take control back and own responsibility, then all of a sudden now I'm in a position where I can make some changes, even if it is a very small step first, right? So sometimes that first step after taking responsibility is I'm going to get a good night's sleep. I don't need to stay up till all hours or get up at a crazy hour to try to fight this thing. I'm going to get a good night's sleep and let my body recuperate.
Yeah.
And that can be a win, right?
Yeah.
So what about you, Dr. Berka? What do you think are there some things that you've done or certainly some things that you've seen in practice that help people kind of come back from that edge and get balance back in their lives?
The biggest thing I always bring up to people is when you're feeling overwhelmed, go back to the original aspect that brings you to balance, and that's your breath. Your diaphragm is directly related and connected through the vagus nerve, which goes up. This is one of the nerves that are involved with regulating balance. It's the longest nerve of the cranial nerves. And breathing, heart rate, blood flow have a lot to do with our sense of, are we feeling attacked? Are we feeling overwhelmed? Are we feeling at peace like I'm on a beach? And so the breathing, and then I say, don't stop with the breathing. Talk to me about things that you know and you remember in your life that are fulfilling, that put you at a state of peace. And I said, breathe and remember those things, visualize. And so using techniques that are not outside of you, just inside of you, that you can do a Control-Alt-Delete, do a reset in real situations where you might not be able to avoid or get out of the situation. I'm thinking about a time in my life where I was in full-on medical school, third year. I was involuntarily activated. I was in the Air Force at the time, Air National Guard, after 9/11. I didn't have a choice. I had to go to medical school. I had to be in that situation. and I was truly overwhelmed. And so I had to find moments in the day or in the night where I could reset. And back to what you said, Caylee, remember, get perspective. This really isn't that serious. And you think you've got it hard? What about other people who are going through 1,000 times more difficulty than you? Stand up and show up. And what I mean by that, when we do these things, it brings you back into that state of presence where you get insight into yourself and foresight into the future and get the reins back in your hands. It gives a lot of power, and it really builds confidence and resiliency in your ability to manage stress in the first place.
Love
I like that. I like that.
That's cool. That's really cool. I think for me, yeah, and by the way, that breathing thing, I don't know how you guys all feel, but I always thought that was hokey falokey stuff. Like, give me a break. I'm just going to close my eyes and breathing. Lame. Until I
already do that every day.
Listen to my voice, guys. You know I do it. So, no, I honestly thought it was really, really silly. I'm like, oh, man. But then I started doing it in a class, or some of these entrepreneurs I'm around, they liked it. So, like, come to this class, and you're doing a lot of deep breathing before you kind of get into some other movements and exercises. And I'd say more movements than exercise. And you're absolutely right. There is just something when you can actually just focus on your body and the breathing and hear your heart. I've never heard that term until I started doing this, hear your heart. And I was like, what? Anyway, I don't want to get off on that tangent, but I want everyone to know, if you think it like I was, like, I'm a man, I don't freaking do this breathing stuff or whatever. It works. It really is. It's such a powerful tool, and don't discredit it. But for me, what happened when I experienced the number one in my life as far as getting closer to burnout, I heard someone say, like, you need to change, right? Oh, drive a different way to work or something, right? You got to make a change in your life. And one of the big changes I've always wanted to do is get better at working out. I know it's a shock. Because you all think I'm chiseled like
so
from
ripped
the
already.
rock of Zeus. I know. I totally get that. I totally understand. But I always wanted to do it. But here's the thing: is like, I don't know how to lift a weight, and I've got to learn everything.
Yeah.
How to lift a weight before I do everything. Right? I can't lift weights until I know every. What if I do the movement wrong? For years, that was my excuse. I don't know if you guys have ever done that, where you're like, I have to be an expert before I get started.
Oh, yeah.
And it's so embarrassing in the gym when you don't know how to use the equipment.
Oh my gosh. You're looking at the stair thing like it's going to be easy. And the next thing you know, you're on there and like, this one's broken. Yeah, doesn't turn on, guys. No, you're absolutely
This one
right.
needs to be fixed.
Yeah, let's get let's clean up over here. This is terrible. I think it's missing some barred oil or something. I don't know. You're just making up words as you walk by people. Or you just lay down after some guy lift about 400 pounds, like, well, I'm done, Am I right?
For
just
sure.
faking it.
Yeah.
But I'm just something about being an expert. Like, I can't get started because I want to make big gains really fast or whatever. And then I had a mentor say, you know what? Yes, you just have to get started, but why don't you just come with us? Join the 5 a.m. club. I'm like, what's that? And he's like, we just get together and we run or we work out, we do movements, but every morning we get together at 5 a.m. And I was like, that's early. But it's not that I wasn't a morning person, but I started doing it at 5 a.m. And all of a sudden, for the last 5 or 6 years, I get up at 5 a.m., whatever the time zone is, and I work out and move my body. And I still have not made the huge gains. I'm not filling out my shirts like I want to. But it doesn't matter because I feel great. And something about moving your body gets you ready and prepared for the day. I'm sure there's lots of studies, and I should know them all. But I'm telling you what, I feel so much better. And I haven't experienced burnout in a long, long time, or even come close, because I always have that reset. There's a silly little show. I don't know if have you guys ever seen the IT Crowd?
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
No.
And these guys don't know it feels like they don't know anything about IT, because their number one thing is, have you turned it off and turned it back on again? That's their whole IT. That's how they fix your stuff. It's silly and you laugh all the time. But for me, that's what it was. All I had to do is that one thing, get my body moving. And guess what? I don't know how to lift weights great. It's probably why I'm not getting stronger, but I'm doing it and I'm moving and I'm doing aerobic, I'm doing anaerobic, all the things they tell you to do in the way that I feel comfortable doing. I'm happy, I'm excited, and it helps me get my day started. And guess what? I fall asleep easier because my body's on just that cycle.
Yeah.
No matter how stressed I am, I can fall asleep and stay asleep. So for me, physiologically, That's what's changed it. So I'm not getting even close to burnout. For me, that worked. But I think the principle of finding a new habit or something and that movement or that breathing, I think we've all kind of talked about it. Or a phrase. I've seen people wear bands, kind of that same way. Instead of saying something like, oh yeah, that band, I should do this. I should express gratitude.
Reminder.
As a reminder, right?
Yeah. I
Love
like,
that.
and the hard thing with habits is they feel difficult to form, right? Easy to break, but hard to form, right?
Yeah.
And I love what James Clear said in his book, The Atomic Habits.
Oh man, great book.
Love it.
Which was, the key is to master the art of showing up, right? And so he helps someone lose weight simply by making a goal to go to the gym for 2 minutes. Right? He's like, well, what am I going to accomplish in a couple of minutes? Right? So you don't have to worry about that. The goal is to get there.
Yep.
Because once you show up, what's going to happen next? Well, while I'm here, I may as well at least do one set, right? And well, I've done one. I'm feeling pretty good now. I might just go on and do another. And it's in the process of mastering showing up versus the habit or the skill, I think that really changes things for us. And certainly morning routines is a great place to master the art of showing up, because it's what do they say? It takes less than 7 seconds to make a first impression, right? And what we don't often think about is we make impressions on ourselves all the time that impact our sense of self, our identity, how I see myself, and so on. So if I've made a commitment to get up in the morning and start strong and have a good start to the day, and I wake up and of course it's hard, I'm tired, I didn't sleep well, and then I choose not to, immediately my first impression of myself in that day is negative.
Yeah, good point.
So I think having a strong start isn't just about the habits that it forms and going, hey, I'm out there exercising, moving, and breathing better at the beginning of the day. It's also the psychological impact that it has on your day when my first impression of myself for the day is a good one.
Yeah.
And I think that can really make a difference for the ability for us to then master the art of showing up. So I think that really makes a difference.
And just a little sidebar is there are some consequences to the 5 a.m. club, and one of them has been my son has taken notice. I don't tell him to wake up earlier, and he doesn't join me at 5 a.m., but he does it at 6 a.m. And he's done that for the last 6-7 months, all by himself. I show him a few things because he asked me questions. But that's what's kind of cool. Back to my original point with those entrepreneurs, when people do 100% of what you don't do. Yes, my son is not lifting 50-pound dumbbells, but he's lifting 10s.
Yeah.
And now he said he lifted 15s the other day, did a full 20 sets or something, or not 20 sets, but 20 reps. And you see what I'm saying? Like, he's starting small, and all because I've been doing it for years. He didn't start on year 1 with me. He didn't do it year 2 or year 3. But it doesn't matter, right? He's starting. And so it's a beautiful consequence. And I don't know if he's going to keep going, but he's got my full support. And yes, there are moments where he's still tired and he doesn't get up. But man, 3 or 4 days out of the week, he gets up and he does his own workout. And I didn't do anything. I didn't say you need to, and your body, you're looking this or that. He just saw whatever he saw, and he decided maybe that's a good idea.
What I love about this is the practical steps for moving away from burnout into a state of balance also are the same steps that take us from a sense of balance to a state of prosperity and really thriving.
Yeah.
Because mastering the art of showing up, joining the 5 a.m. club, for example, whatever it might be, having those words of affirmation, having a community or a special significant other that is there to give us perspective, the art of communicating and sharing our feelings, all of these types of things, they all take us into that state of balance and keep us grounded and appropriately aware of how we're interpreting the world. But they also lead us to all of these places that we're really trying to get to in the first place. So it's not like you go, I need to do this to survive, and then I need to do something totally different to thrive.
Yeah.
It's actually the same stuff.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Guys, I think we've reached the end of our discussion on going from burnout to balance, but what a great conclusion we've reached. We all experience balance. We all aspire for balance, but experience that burnout along the way because life is complicated. It's hard. And I would say anyone that's feeling that tinge, or maybe they're deeply kind of mired in that burnout, you're not alone. Right?
Yeah.
This is something I think we all experience from time to time, but there are ways out. And we hope today has helped cast a light on the opportunity to do just that. Cool. Thank you all for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you, of course, on our next show. Take care, everyone.
Take
Thanks,
care.
everyone.